Well, welcome to the fourth week of our Money Talk series here throughout the month of August, where together as a community, we are looking at how Jesus talked about money and how Jesus invites us, if we're going to be his followers, to be faithful with our finances according to his way and kind of vision for our lives. And for this week, we wanted to get even more conversational in our talks and our talking together. And so I'm joined by Annie Froese, our executive director of our Homelessness Services Ministries, and soon to be co-lead pastor along with me as we're growing and moving into a new leadership structure later this fall, as well as Nate Dirks, who some of you would know, especially in our Vineland location. And Nate plays the role that we describe as our action pastor, guiding and directing the ongoing development of all of our anchor causes of justice and compassion across our church community. And so glad to be having this money talk together with both of you. And to kind of get into it, maybe the first question would be, what have each of you found most helpful or inspiring so far in our money talks conversations that we've had up to this point?
Yeah, we're glad to be here. I think I can speak for both of us. If I'm thinking about this money talks, I think it has in some ways been a bit of a long time coming. And as I've reflected on for our family, for John and I, and even our kids, what has been the most inspiring, the most helpful has actually been a phrase that was used, I believe, when Rowan spoke in week 2, that was turning everything on its head for me. It was that when it comes to money, God does not want something from us, but wants something for us, which is so counterintuitive in the ways that we live our lives related to finances. We donate to things. Maybe you get asked for donations, even at the checkout of a grocery store. When it comes to our money, we're pretty well established to understand that people want things from us, and God turns all of that on its head and deeply wants something for us. That something being a closeness, a change of heart, a desire to see people the way that he does, a life that's characterized by the fruits of the Spirit, and that so much of that is growth that comes through the ways that we handle our finances.
Yeah, I similarly feel that in those gifts of what God has for us in the conversation, for me, something that stood out was even in the idea of the 10% to God and then 90% to use with creativity for ourselves and for others. The experience of the freedom, first of all, in that I think there's even a freedom in that clarity and in that invitation to give back to God. And also that there's just a generosity in that experience of being able to say that there's a gift to us. And I think Geraldine spoke about this during the series as well in her video of the 90%, that us being able to use that 90%, that is a gift of generosity that we get to receive. And definitely does feel like that language of something for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, beautiful. And those are good summaries of some of the key things that we've been learning together as a church. And today we want to pick up this conversation and carry it forward together, really picking up on that 90-10 principle we learned about last week, where last week we were taught about this biblical concept of tithing, of seeing everything we have as a gift from God and seeking to return that first 10% of what we earn to God out of an act of worship and trust and remembering that all we have is from him. And while that is a significant act of faith and trust and following Jesus, it's actually not where Jesus's talk about money ends. And today we want to sort of pick up the conversation and say, what does Jesus think or maybe even say about the other 90%, the rest of our money? And this really picks up on a verse we heard last week of Jesus speaking in Matthew 23, where he was speaking to some of the religious experts of his day and addressing some of their areas of growth or even hypocrisy, where he said, "For you are careful to tithe, give a tenth of even the tiniest income from your herb gardens. But you ignore the more important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, and faith," Jesus said. Then Jesus said this, he said, "You should tithe, yes, but," because he's correcting them here, but I think it could be also heard as an "and," "do not neglect the more important things," Jesus said. And I think this starts to get at kind of the rest of how we see our money and wanting to be people that are about those more important things of justice and mercy. And how have each of you, and in your lives and your faiths and your roles within our community, understood this vision and invitation from Jesus about living a life of generosity, a life of mercy and justice kind of in this way with our money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to the financial part of it, it's been interesting. I know that for my wife and I, there's parts of that we've really found challenging. And even speaking to other people, I know that other people experience some of the same feeling of, what does that look like for me? And I know for Tara and I, we spent the first half decade of our marriage doing unpaid volunteer work. And we've kind of financially, we've often felt kind of behind the eight ball here in kind of Southern Ontario, just coming back into things. And what does that look like to try to catch up financially? And in that question of generosity and in the questions of what God would invite us to in our lives and even specifically in our finances, sometimes for us, there's almost been a sense of shame or question of like, well, I don't know what that looks like for us, and I don't think the numbers feel huge, and how do we actually lean into that? And knowing that it's not a question of shame, but actually that there's many facets of generosity. It's been interesting being in a series like this, starting to lean into some of those facets.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because even that phrase, generous giving, or say you receive something and you feel that's very generous, very often it's large, right? And so this whole idea of generous giving can make it feel like we're supposed to, it only counts as generous if it's a really big number or if what we're giving is really sacrificial. And really, when I've thought about this phrase of generous giving and what that looks like in our lives, I think it has everything to do with the kind of lives in community that we're invited to live together, right? We know, and we talk a lot in our community about how none of us were intended to do this alone. And I think that even the vision of what Jesus calls us to includes relationally connected mutuality in relationship, not going siloed or alone, but going together. And so for me, how those concepts relate to one another is this generous giving being about a posture of open-handedness with the things that we have. You know, if we're connected, if we're in community and loving one another well, we are open-handed in our posture so that the things that we have help to meet the needs of the others. And through that, out of acts of compassion and justice, just by way of our very posture, nobody goes without.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that everything is in huge quantity, but that it actually has far more to do with the posture that we hold.
Yeah. And I love that, even just in the different parts of our generosity with our time and our resources, financial resources, or who we are. Like, I feel like that weaves things in really well.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of grace in that.
Yeah.
And I think those are such helpful starting points in this conversation about generosity and compassion with kind of that other 90% of what we have, that it starts with how we see it, how we're thinking about it, a posture more than amounts or dollars and cents necessarily, even though that's part of what we might do with our money. And I know in our family, kind of a very simple money management concept that we've actually shared here before, and we've been trying to use to help instruct our kids, is this concept of like 3 things we might do with our money: give, save, and use has kind of been the word that's maybe been the most helpful that we wrestle with and try to grow in. Sometimes that's referred to as give, save, spend, but we've tried to use this use language of how do we steward what we have, and then think about everything we use or spend as a decision where we're trying to have this kind of posture. And Jesus even used some of that language, and when you talk about the interconnectedness and for the purpose of relationships, we heard this line from Jesus the very first week of this series in Luke 16, where Jesus, after telling a parable having to do with our wealth and resources, he says, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends generously in community, and see that posture with our money and our stuff. And he says, then when your possessions are gone, you will be welcomed into eternal homes. He's sort of alluding to there's this eternal impact when we try to live this way, thinking about all that we have with this posture, with this heart, and kind of wrestling through our growth in that. Yeah. I mean, probably what we want to spend now the most of our time talking about together today is lots of ways we see this at work in our community. And all kinds of stories and examples, and also applications, for us of how we can grow in this together and inspire each other to grow in this. So I'd be curious, what are some stories and examples that you've both seen in our community of people that are trying to use their money and use their life in this generous way and compassionate way with others?
Yeah, there's so many stories, and I feel like there's even just thinking it through, and all of them kind of take different angles. And one I think that hit me in a specific way earlier this year was as in our Vineland community, we're a mixed community of Canadian, Caribbean community members together. And we work together to support each other's needs. And one of the ways is that when the Caribbean community of migrant farm workers is coming back in the late winter and early spring, we always want to make sure that one of the ways we welcome everybody back is with these welcome kits, these bags, and then we just fill them with all kinds of good stuff to welcome them, and just a sense of really specific needs that they're going to have when they get here, and then just as a way of providing a gift. And two of our Jamaican community members came back a little bit earlier than a lot of the rest of the community this year, and they were coming out to church, and one of the Sundays they were there, and they took me aside, and they had money that they'd set aside to say, hey, this is for the welcome kits. And for me, it just hit me differently, because I was like, the welcome kits are for you. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, and they received them. We're like, but there's guys coming after us, and we're here to be able to provide for that. Yeah. And I absolutely loved that they had specifically set, and they're here to work hard to send money home to their families, and it's true, they're doing that. But they set this money aside to be a blessing. Wow. And that I absolutely loved, just to see it happening in that way.
Yeah. Attachment, so that mutuality, we're all in this together and meeting all the needs. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, I would echo, I think there's lots and lots of examples of this, and we've pared it down to just a couple to tell this morning, but we have this privilege of being in the know on some of these examples. One for me that comes to mind is in our St. Catharines location, we have this space called the Norms, and it's named after a former resident and friend of us whose name was Norm. And when we went through the process of beginning that renovation a couple of years ago, there were some really significant, generous gifts who came and helped with the renovation costs, whether that was adding even some of their skill in design and helping us make some choices to create that space, but then also generously donating the costs for things like light fixtures and paint and the big TV that's on the wall. And I think it's interesting and probably important to note that the donation didn't come because this person really cares about light fixtures, and the other donation did not come because this person really cares about the TV, though maybe they do, but because there was a real inspiration to the vision of what that space was intended to be. The people who donated to that renovation and the creation of that space are people who are deeply compelled by and are already living out this life of friendship with people who have come primarily through the shelter in ways that have been reciprocal and mutually life-changing. And so the generosity was really spurred on by how compelling the vision was for what they were trying to create, which I loved. I mean, speaking of Norms, and I could probably brag about it for a long time, but the entire framework of Norms and how it operates, we use this button system. So if you've ever come to Norms, if you haven't, you're welcome. But if you have, you know that we use a button system. So you can come and you can purchase a snack or a hot drink or even a meal, and though you can come and pay with cash, or you can come and pay with a card, you also can come and pay with a button. And those buttons are actually populated and paid for, provided by others who have chosen not only to pay for their coffee, but also to pay that little bit extra to purchase some buttons that then are available for use. And the entire basis of that system is a really dignifying one. I've used a button and no one blinks twice, and you don't have to worry about, oh, these are the people who have something to give and these are the people who don't. It actually is just a real common ground.
I've had so many brownies from those buttons. They're great.
We wondered where they went.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
But it is just an example of how even that generosity, that posture of generosity can even be quite small. It can be $1 in the moment, but it has real impact on others being able to come and access everything that they need.
Yeah. Well, and similarly, it's interesting you talk about like our spaces and just how we value each other in creative ways through the ways that we try to get together in specific spaces. And one of those recently was, again, this spring in Vineland. We were wanting to change our gym setup so that it was more of a gym, and so that our kids would have more of an opportunity to really use that space as a gym. And thinking about our evenings together with our Caribbean community, we switched from it being a Caribbean center to a Caribbean Canadian center to really just bring people together. And really, it was for the benefit of families and kids, being like, we can really lean into our kids and this lifestyle together. And in doing that, we're thinking of how do we bless our children. And there was a couple of guys that came to me in the middle of the season. It was one friend who's from Trinidad and another who was from Jamaica, and both came up and said, hey, I love what we're doing for the kids in our community, and essentially saying like our kids, right? And saying, I've set this money aside because I wanted to bless the kids and make sure that the gym space would be improved in the ways that we're talking about. And one of their friends who said, hey, I hear that some of the specific expenses are these soccer balls, and coming from a sports background and everything, I was like, I love that. Can I buy these soccer balls? And was just a real act of generosity on both their parts. And again, just really a way to bless the community around, and just, again, shows sort of that really unique picture of leaning into generosity together. There's another story that's different than this in some ways, but where there were some friends who were thinking about some of the spaces that we get together in our Welland community on a Friday night. Every Friday night we have these community dinners together called Harvest Kitchen. And there were some friends who were saying, I love that we do this as a church. And we would love, there was a couple that were like, we would love to participate. And because of both of our work, we just can't. But we see what happens there, and we just really want to just support that. And they said, could we actually pay for the costs of the budgetary costs that we see? We share those together as a community of what these things cost together. They said, we've seen that cost. Could we actually pay for that for the year? And that was their act of generosity to say, like, we love and value community, this togetherness, and they live it out in relational ways. And this was a way to financially support it as well. Yeah.
Well, speaking actually, because that really meets a food security need. Harvest Kitchen does that work every Friday night. We have what we call in St. Catharines our Pantry Partners program that was started by someone who is deeply connected to our shelter community and was becoming increasingly bothered really by how much food insecurity continued to be a part of reality, a part of regular life for people coming through the shelter and then trying to get established in their own places. And there are limits to things like the food banks, how often you can go. And so she created this program that allowed people some self-agency and some choice. What are the tailored options, in this category of item? What shape pasta do you prefer? What's your favorite kind of pasta sauce? Or what condiments do you use regularly and what do you never use? A grocery list that people could populate for themselves. And then there are partnerships. And the partnerships are actually anonymous. So you come on Sunday, and if you receive a Pantry Partners bag, you don't know who's purchased those for you. But you know that they are personalized because of the system that's set up. What I really love is that this came out of seeing a need and working to meet that need. And then really the person who established it became the primary inviter of people as they were in conversation with their life group and people on Sunday mornings or the people they volunteer with. And there are now 37 partners who have their regular food needs met or at least supported through the Pantry Partners program. So cool.
Beautiful.
Bow tie pasta. That's the best. Pasta. It's gotta be. It's interesting because it's not even just. I think there's a lot of stories where there are kids in our community who also step into being generous in different ways. We have so many stories over the years, and just one of them that stands out to me is our Brave Girls program, where the girls there who have been connected and have had an awareness of Indigenous communities around us. Some up north in Mish, and then also even around here as we were connected most specifically to the advocacy work happening at 1492 Land Back Lane with land defense there. And so the Brave Girls had gotten together, and knowing that every month we went out there and we're bringing meals to support the work at Land Back and to support the Indigenous land defenders who were there. And the girls got together and raised some funds so that we could pay for some of the meals that were going out there. And we were able to bring some really good meals and some favorites that were some of the community favorites up there because of that. And just love the proactivity of the girls to say, can we do this? Can we participate? And they really did in a tangible way.
So cool.
Yeah.
It's a great, all kinds of inspiring examples of, I think, what we're talking about and living this out and the beauty that flows through it. We had joked as we were preparing for this, like, we could have the hour-long version of some of these lists of stories and things. But again, in just bringing this into, like, how Jesus invites us to think about our money. We talked about it. All of these people seeing needs and responding to them with just, like, open and generous hearts. It makes me think about... there's this passage where it's actually Jesus' brother James is talking about the difference between really a fully alive and like active faith, or one that he describes as dead. And he describes this kind of faith as most alive. He says, suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, some of these kinds of needs, and instead you said goodbye and have a good day and stay warm and eat well, but then you don't give that person any food or clothing. He's saying, what good does that do? That's missing out on the life Jesus has for us. And so many of these are examples of people seeing those needs and just responding out of love and trust in God to be generous, which is so Jesus-y and so inspiring for me.
Yeah, such a tangible way to live out faith.
Right? Some of these kinds of things you've highlighted, these are even examples of people responding to needs. When it comes to then other needs currently within our community and opportunities for all of us to grow in justice, mercy, compassion, generosity, wanting to use our resources in these kinds of ways, and maybe especially beyond kind of the practice of tithing to the church, what are some specific needs the two of you would highlight these days that could be met with a growing generosity from us?
Yeah, we were talking about the fact that in some ways it's interesting because some of the things that come to mind, they sound kind of non-glamorous because we've talked about them before.
They're not new and exciting.
Right, totally.
Yeah.
And you almost want new and exciting to be able to say. But the power of the things that we've been doing and found that how effective they are, how much they're a part of the process of being consistent in relationship and also being consistent in justice, right? When we talk about justice, there's a movement to justice and it takes time and it takes that kind of consistency. And so for us, there's some things that we just continue to do and we continue to be convinced are just really helpful in that movement. And so some of them are just not glamorous, but they are just a constant need that we have.
Yeah. I mean, one that comes to mind, well, really what comes to mind immediately for me would be the various ways that we collect to meet practical needs during Southridge Special Delivery every year during our Hope Lives series. I remember year after year watching the cereal boxes stack up in the lobby of our St. Catherine's location, sometimes wrapped around a Christmas tree, but
Christmas tree would get covered with Cheerios.
With growing, and not even Cheerios, more like the Fruit Loops and the really sugary
The
stuff.
Tim Hortons donut flavored ones were pretty classic.
That's when you're really mean. Yeah,
Yes.
that's some Fruit Loops.
But I do think about that and the need that exists really all year round in our pantry. I know for St. Catherine's, but I think about Welland as well in a food program, and wonder even if our community knows that those are needs that can be met all the time, and we don't have to wait until Southridge Special Delivery to be able to meet that need. But if we're in the grocery store and we see that cereal is on sale, to throw in an extra box and know that our welcome centers or our main church office is prepared to receive that and make sure it gets to the right place kind of at any time throughout the year.
Our middle child, Isaiah, loves that. And so at times he's put together some of his own money and said, can I go and choose some specific cereals? Because it's fun. And it just added something to sort of like this is something for us when we go to the grocery store, but like he has an other-centered approach. And it gives a really fun way for kids to be able to engage in it too.
He picks that donut hole one, doesn't he?
He's got to, exactly. Whatever the most colorful
kids,
one.
if you're listening, the strategy is one for me and one for our community. Like,
exactly.
So generous.
So anyway, back to Jesus. And
did you want to talk on the Becoming Good Relatives initiative?
Yeah, absolutely. So one that is newer, but is something that we're being more consistent with is our Becoming Good Relatives team has really valued the opportunity to do what's called a blanket exercise. And so we've done a few of these over the last few years, and dozens of people in the community have now done them, and we hope that every person at Southridge will do it in the next few years. And it's just this really experiential learning moment, and it costs money. We're bringing in friends from Indigenous communities through Mennonite Central Committee, and even something like that is something that could be sponsored because we're able to do this on an annual basis and there's a cost to it. And those are some examples of things that we'd love for people to participate in. And if it's something, how can I be generous?
For sure.
Respond to that.
Well, and maybe you're hearing that and hearing MCC, or maybe you sponsor A Child Through Compassion, which is another organization that we love and support mutually. And you're wondering if that also counts in terms of how we're living generously. It's outside of the church, but it is purposeful and really impacting lives on the other end of it. And in case you need to hear that this morning, it absolutely counts. I think we have held a posture of strong partnerships during the entire duration of our church, and certainly to see that in the future. And so if you're wondering, I may feel even a little bit bad that I'm sponsoring over here and not here, you don't have to. It really in that, how can we use the things that we have been blessed with? We want to be as open-handed as possible in all of the ways that we can meet the needs of the people around us.
Yeah, it's worth sharing and celebrating.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, again, it's the Jesus vision of how do we all grow in all that I have. I'm trying to help see his kingdom of abundance and provision come on earth as in heaven, in my neighborhood, and other things I sponsor. And as a community, we're talking a lot about opportunities within our community because there are so many needs, there are so many opportunities, including building off what we shared last week about what if we grew toward the practice or in the practice of tithing, because we got roofs that even still need repair and fixing as we care for our shelter community and all of that. But it's how do we grow in this life, this way, this seeing all that we have to want to steward and use for generous and compassionate purposes, because it's the life God has and wants for us. doesn't need from us, but wants for us together. So as we're kind of nearing the end, I think, and wrapping up today's Money Talk, any final encouragements from each of you? Just last things you want to mention or inspire in this conversation?
I think that one thing that stands out to me is just that the opportunity to give and seeing it as an opportunity towards generous giving. I mean, I think that what we're constantly doing as a community here and what we're living is to experience more of the person of Jesus, to experience more of the kingdom of God, of love being lived out around us. And there's something in just giving generously and joyfully that creates a unique inroad into some of that, into experiencing Jesus in ways that in other places we wouldn't get to. And so just being able to see that posture of joyful giving and hearing some of those stories has been an encouragement to me, and we've seen some of how that plays out. And so that's been one part of it. The joyfulness in that, I think, is more than just like a guilt or a how do we live that out with joy. And then another part of it to me is just sort of a phrase that stood out is just this idea of prophetic witness. It's sort of a weird one, but the idea of that there's in prophetic, there's a naming how things can be, how things could be. And the witness is for people to be able to be invited into, our money doesn't have to own us. We can actually use our money in ways that are well beyond ourselves, and that we can see unique things happening that really reflect God and the love of God in the ways that we do that. And so I think those that stands out to me.
Yeah. I think in terms of final encouragement for me, I think maybe a little bit more practically, but I think there's a real invitation to lean into this posture of generosity, not only as things to be completed, actions to be completed, something to give, something to purchase, something to hand in, whatever that looks like, and to go beyond only the action to be completed and instead lean into them as opportunities to learn and to be challenged and to have an experience of what God wants to do in us through that posture, holding that posture, sometimes even when it's not the thing that we want to do or the thing that we maybe feel the most compelled to do. And instead, recognizing how much Jesus talked about money, it only makes sense that there are unique things that God wants to do in terms of shaping us, growing our heart, growing our expressions of love that can only be done when we are holding this posture of generosity. So to not only lean into the things to do, but also to really expect God to be present and active in those moments.
Yeah, it's such a heart thing and an act of faith, and yet it's all grounded in this trust that God loves us. And I've been thinking, as we were preparing for this one, there's a line from Jesus. Actually, it's quoted in the book of Acts that we didn't really get to study specifically because it was in a bigger section, but where the Apostle Paul quotes Jesus as saying, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." That Jesus is trying to name and speak to this reality that there's actually something greater for us in giving than receiving, which everything in our world tries to tell us or tempt us to believe otherwise. My heart often is tempted to believe otherwise, but I want to grow in trusting that and experiencing the blessing, the wonder, the provision, the noting among us, here in a community like ours and growing in our region, because that's the life I think Jesus is inviting us into. So thanks so much to you two for us sharing in this conversation together, getting to have kind of a money talk conversation. I hope it only keeps inspiring the conversations we're having together this month. And if you've missed any, that you can catch those through our podcast or online. I hope you participate next week as we finish out this series, as we all seek to grow in this Jesus way together. So I'll say a prayer as we wrap up today's Money Talk. Jesus, we thank you for who you are and all that you have done for us, that you have come and lived so generously, pouring out your life in such a responsive, interruptible way, showing us what it's like to live in the kingdom of God and inviting us into it, and ultimately pouring out your life generously by giving up your life on the cross and pouring out your spirit through your resurrection. That's what invites us into this abundant life and generous and compassionate life together. And you've already done everything we need. And so I pray that we keep growing and trusting you, following you, talking about this together, spurring one another on to love and good deeds, and experiencing the beauty of your blessing in our world. We thank you and we love you. Amen.